Okay, hello my students. We are on page number 929 and we're on lesson 5. And today we're going to be classifying quadrilaterals. If you see this girl cutting out paper, she must be cutting out paper. It says she's cutting them out for her travel photos. You know you're on the right page. So today we're going to be classifying or sorting quadrilaterals using one or more attributes like congruent sides, parallel sides, right angles. We're going to use those things. So example 1. Here's our girl Trina. It says Trina cut out polygon mats to use for her travel photos. Use the figures below to determine the missing attributes of each quadrilateral. Okay, so a trapezoid, this is a trapezoid. It is a quadrilateral with exactly 2 pair of opposite sides parallel. So note this one is parallel to this one. These ones make an equal sign. Oh, I'm so sorry. It's exactly 1. You guys forgive me. Mrs. Bodell was thinking 2 lines, but it's 1 pair. Exactly 1 pair. So you'll notice these are your equal signs. These ones will never cross, but look at these guys. If those lines kept going, they would cross right there. So this is parallel to this, but these lines are not parallel. So trapezoids have exactly 1 pair of opposite parallel sides. Okay. Now we have this one here, right? This guy is called a parallelogram. Parallel, that's our word that we use when something's not going to cross. Parallelogram, it is a quadrilateral with opposite sides congruent and parallel. So this side is the same length as this side, and they're parallel. They're like an equal sign. They'll never cross each other. If you kept going, you would go off the page forever into infinity, and it would never cross. And the same is true about this line, line 2. These lines are also parallel. These lines would go up forever, but never cross. And they are also the same length. So a parallelogram is a quadrilateral with opposite sides congruent and parallel. A rectangle, you guys all know what a rectangle is a type of parallelogram. Notice it's a parallelogram because look at same length and they're equal signs, they're parallel, same length, equal signs, parallel. But it's a special parallelogram with 4 right angles, 90-degree angles, 4 90-degree right angles. Okay, now we have a square. You guys know what a square is. You know how to determine that. That is another type of parallelogram, right? Because I've got the same length and they're parallel, goes on forever, would never cross, and the same length and they're parallel, goes on forever. So it's a parallelogram with all sides congruent. All the sides are also the same length. And all right angles. They also have all right angles. You could put all or 4. With 4 sides congruent and 4 right angles, or all sides congruent and all right angles. And then the last one is a rhombus. Say rhombus. It's not rhombus, it's a rhombus. And that's this shape right here. And it is also a parallelogram. This one is the same length as this one. They're parallel, would go on forever. This one is the same length as this one. They're parallel, they would go on forever. But it just doesn't have those right angles like a square. So a parallelogram with all sides congruent is a rhombus. But rhombuses aren't squares because they don't have right angles. A square has all the attributes of a rectangle and what else? And a rhombus. It has all those attributes. All of its sides are congruent. So it has all those attributes, but it has some additional ones from those two. Okay, now we got our terminology down. We've got a trapezoid, parallelogram, rectangle, square, and rhombus. Let's go to example 2 on the back page. One side of the Realia building in Madrid, Spain is shown at the right. That's a pretty crazy building going on its side like that. Describe the attributes of the quadrilateral, then classify it based on its attributes. So it has opposite sides that are congruent. They're the same length. And they're also parallel. They're like equal signs going out forever. They'll never cross. So the opposite sides are congruent and parallel. So this is we're going to look at our chart. Opposite sides congruent and parallel is a parallelogram. This is a parallelogram. Parallelogram. Okay, let's do guided practice. Parallelogram. You can go back if you need to write that down. Describe the attributes of the quadrilateral below, then classify it based on its attributes. So, the opposite sides of the quadrilateral are, so this one, they're the same length, right? We could measure it if we want, but it's pretty easy to tell. It's pretty easy to tell. We could measure. That's 4.5 and 4.5. So they're congruent. We'll check these ones too. 1.8 and 1.8. So the opposite sides are congruent and they're parallel. If we drove those up forever following that same line, they would never cross, and then these opposite sides would never cross. That means they're parallel. So the opposite sides of the quadrilateral are congruent and parallel, and there are how many right angles? 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 right angles. So we go back to our chart. The opposite sides of the quadrilateral are congruent and parallel, and there are 4 right angles. So we go back a page. The opposite sides are congruent and parallel. That's a parallelogram, but it has 4 right angles. So it's a parallelogram with 4 right angles. So it is a rectangle. You probably knew that just by glancing at it, but we had to prove it by classifying these. Okay, this one says the design below is made up of a repeating quadrilateral. Describe the attributes of the quadrilateral, then classify it based on its attributes. So we're talking about this little diamond-y shape right there. So let's see, how many congruent sides does it have? Well, if you can't tell, you can always measure it. So we'll just do this little one. Oh, it's 1 centimeter, 1 centimeter, 1 centimeter, and 1 centimeter. So all sides are congruent. So 4 congruent sides. All sides are congruent. Opposite sides are parallel, right? This line would go out forever. You could keep doing this pattern and it would never cross. So opposite sides are parallel. So a quadrilateral with 4 congruent sides and the opposite sides are parallel. So opposite sides are congruent and parallel, so it's a parallelogram, and they're all congruent. It's a rhombus. It's not a square because it doesn't have those right angles. So this is put my thing back, a rhombus. Why is a square a special kind of rectangle? So remember, a rectangle has opposite sides congruent, the same length. It has opposite angles, or it's parallel. Opposite sides are parallel. They'll never cross if you kept the lines going. And it has right angles. Well, the only difference between that and a square is that all four sides are the same length. So it is a special rectangle. It is a special rectangle. Okie dokie, let's do some independent practice. It says, describe the attributes of each quadrilateral, then classify. So I've got opposite sides are congruent. So opposite sides congruent or equal. I've got these look like equal signs going out in the distance, and so do these sideways. So opposite side or opposite sides are parallel. So what is it? Opposite sides congruent and opposite sides parallel. It is a parallelogram. Parallelogram. So let's look at number 4. Pause it if you need more time to write those words down. And then let's look at number 4. I've got opposite sides congruent. Oh, but are they all 4 congruent? Hold on. Let's measure just to see. That one is 1.7, 1.7, 1.7, 1.7. So all 4 sides are congruent. All 4 sides congruent. It's definitely they're parallel, the opposite sides. Opposite sides are parallel. So which one has all, it's a parallelogram, but it also has all 4 sides congruent, so we call that special one a rhombus. A rhombus. It's a special type of parallelogram. Just like a rectangle is a special type of parallelogram, and just like a square is a special type of parallelogram. Okay, question 5 says, circle the quadrilaterals that have the same attributes as a parallelogram. So remember, a parallelogram has this stuff, opposite sides congruent and opposite sides parallel. So does a rectangle have opposite sides congruent? Let's see if I drew a rectangle. Yeah, the opposite sides are congruent and the opposite sides are parallel. So yeah, it has the same qualifications. It just has an additional one. It has those right angles, but it is a type of parallelogram. A rhombus, so that's this one here. Opposite sides are congruent and opposite sides are parallel. So this one also is a type of parallelogram. A square, are opposite sides congruent? Yes, they're all congruent actually. And are opposite sides parallel? Yes, a square is a type of parallelogram. What about a trapezoid? Trapezoid, exactly one of them is parallel. So no, both opposite sides. This one isn't parallel with that one. It would cross. So trapezoid, no, you're out, trapezoid. I kind of X'd him out anyway. Trapezoid's out. Okay, we're going to now circle the quadrilateral that has the same attributes as a rhombus. Now here's our rhombus. All 4 sides are congruent. Let's check that first. Are all 4 sides congruent on a rectangle? No, they're different sizes. What about a square? Yeah. Okay, let's leave that for now. What about a trapezoid? No, all 4 sides are not congruent. What about a parallelogram? They don't have to be, so no. Okay, so the only one we're checking is a square. The other attribute of a rhombus is that all sides are parallel, and that is true. So a square is a type of rhombus. Okay, let's do number 7. It says all parallelograms have opposite sides congruent and parallel. Since rectangles are parallelograms, all rectangles have opposite sides and sides congruent and parallel. That's true. All rectangles have to have opposite sides congruent and parallel. Let's look at number 8. It says all squares have 4 congruent sides. Since rectangles are squares, all rectangles have 4 congruent sides. Wait a minute. Those aren't all 4 congruent sides. This is false. Not all rectangles are squares. Not all rectangles are squares. Remember, squares are a special type of rectangle, but not the other way around. Okay, let's go to the back. It says, math practice number 7 to identify structure. Many aircraft display the shape of the American flag as shown below to indicate motion. So on a plane, you might see it like this, so it looks like the flag is kind of flowing. Classify this quadrilateral? Well, we've got opposite sides congruent and opposite sides parallel. That is a parallelogram. It's not a rectangle, it doesn't have right angles, and it's not a rhombus because it doesn't have all sides equal. Number 10. Adina used a quadrilateral in her art design. The quadrilateral has no sides congruent and only one pair of opposite parallel sides. Classify the shape. So let's try and draw it out. No sides congruent. So I've got that one, and that one, and that one, and that one. Only one pair of opposite sides are parallel. Mrs. Bodell didn't draw this super good, but it would have been like that to show that these are parallel. It has exactly one pair of opposite sides parallel, so that shape is called a trapezoid. Just one side parallel. Exactly one side parallel. Not two sides parallel, but one side parallel. Question number 11. Tracy planted 2 tomato gardens. One garden is rectangular. I'm going to draw it. The shape of the second garden has all of the attributes of the rectangular garden. In addition, it has 4 congruent sides. What is the shape of the second tomato garden? So we know that rectangles have to have 4 right angles. They have to have opposite sides congruent, and they have to be parallel. But this other one has 4 equal sides, congruent sides. It is a square. It has all the qualifications of being a rectangle, but it's even more special because all the sides are the same. Hot problems. Math practice number 4. To model math, we're going to draw a parallelogram that is not a square. Cannot be a square. It cannot be a rhombus. And it cannot be a rectangle. What can you draw? What can you draw? Well, think of one, try and draw it. Check your work. You could have drawn a trapezoid. Looks like that or like that. Exactly one pair of congruent sides. Oh, a parallelogram, Mrs. Bodell. It has to be like this. Opposite sides are congruent, and opposite sides are both parallel. A parallelogram. There we go. And it's not a rectangle, and it's not a rhombus, and it's not a square. Great work today, everybody. Keep up the good work.